off. I should be on both audio and video right now.
Well, let me try again. Okay, try again now, sir.
Okay, try it again. I should be speaking at a reasonable volume. Can you hear me? Was that a yes?
All right, I'm hearing it. Technology.
Yes. Well, at some point I will need to share my slides also.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, you're a co-host now, Mr. Malone. Thanks for your patience.
Okay, so I don't know if you're ready for me to share.
Yes, I'll be introducing you a quick introduction and then you can begin your presentation. So allow me to introduce you, Dr. Malone. All right, so good afternoon again, everyone. Welcome to another exciting meeting of Campus Changer. Today we have our guest speaker, Dr. Bruce Malone, who is speaking on the theme, the complexity of life and DNA, the evidence for our creator God. But before he gets into that, I have the pleasure of introducing him. Now, Dr. Malone gave his life to Christ over 25 years ago, as the Lord miraculously preserved him through a close call with death. Since that time, Dr. Malone has looked for deeper purpose in life and realized that rejection of biblical truth, justified by belief in evolution, is an acid which is eating away at the moral foundation of our culture. Bruce spent 30 years working as a research leader for the Dow Chemical Corporation, has a degree in chemical engineering, and is responsible for key innovation which has resulted in 18 patents. Our speaker is well-versed in science, all right? But his passion is sharing the relevance and the evidence for creation. So he retired early to become a full-time director of Search for Truth Ministry. Dr. Malone has spoken extensively from secular universities to Christian groups in 12 countries. And since 2008, Dr. Malone gave almost 800 lectures to more than 50,000 people. More than 60,000 books on the scientific credibility of creation has been donated to students and prisoners. Dr. Malone brings science alive through stories and demonstrations showing that biblical creation is the most rational explanation for the world around us. And Dr. Malone resides in Midland, MI, with his wife, Robin, and they have 4 children who are actively serving the Lord. So without further ado, let me hand over to Dr. Malone, who will be speaking to us today. The floor is yours, sir.
All right, thank you for the introduction. Let me pull up my presentation. Oh, one moment. That is interesting. It wants to go to the very end. Let's try it this way. Huh. It didn't do this when we tested it. Every time I open it, it goes to the very last slide. Interesting.
All right, probably to troubleshoot you, yes, you could click on the first slide. And
I do, whenever I click on the first slide, it goes to the very last slide.
Wow.
It immediately scrolls down to the very last slide immediately.
You click on presentation view or on presenter view?
What was that?
Have you tried what is the issue? Can you repeat that again?
I've opened share presentation.
Right.
Whenever I go and I click on the very first slide, it just scrolls. Oh, no, it scrolls to the very bottom. Okay. It looked like it might work if I go to the second slide.
You could stop share and share again.
Okay, let's try that. Thank you. Fortunately, we got started a little bit early, so that is good. So let's share screen. Same thing.
All right. you probably have to close the presentation and open it again then, because I'm not sure what's going on.
All right, let me close my presentation. I'm going to stop share. And it will close. I'm going to minimize this view. Close the presentation. All right. We did test this about 2 hours ago. It worked fine.
Yes, that's fine. That's okay because these things
If
happen with
needs be.
technology.
Yeah, if needs be, I can actually remote control. When you share screen again, I can actually remote control your computer and kind of fix it from there if needs be. But that will be the last option.
This is very strange what's going on.
All right, so you could reopen the presentation and then
No, I can't reopen the presentation. Whenever I click on the presentation, I go to my folder with all of my presentations. Instead of opening that folder, it opens a Word document on my computer. It's almost like my cursor is pointing to the wrong thing on the computer. Huh. Okay. Nope, same thing. Wow. You know what? This may take a few minutes, but I think I'm going to have to shut down my computer and start it back up. So then I will rejoin the meeting. I apologize.
No problem. That's okay. These things happen. We do appreciate the time, and you were also waiting on us with our technical difficulties.
Restart.
So yes.
All right, share screen again. I can remote control here.
I think he left the meeting and is coming back, but what we can do probably is discuss around the topic. I don't know, Marcel, if you had something or review what you did last week, impromptu.
Well, what I could speak on the fact that I don't know if somebody saw the new Netflix special with the brother who went to prison for all those murders and rapes that he committed. I can't remember his name. You remember the guy's name? It's a white guy who's go around and kill a lot of people in different communities. I think that's his name. He actually said he based his worldview on the evolution doctrine, right? And he became a Christian a couple months before he died. And he realized that this lifestyle that he was doing was really terrible, but it was based on evolution, where he said that he doesn't see how having any meaning. We don't have any type of point of reference, so he doesn't see why it was bad. It's not until he became a Christian and he started to ask relevant questions where he actually recognized that, yo, what I was doing was wrong. I'm not saying that now everybody who believe in evolution are evil, but I'm just saying that taking to this logical conclusion, you can actually see how people can jump to something crazy like that. I found that to be a very interesting take, and I saw it in the introduction for Dr. Malone, where evolutionary framework is it actually eats away of morality. Even Hitler gave the book on Darwinism to Stalin, right? He based his belief of there being a superior man from Darwinism, right? Because he said that man should evolve to create the ultimate man. And to do that, we have to get rid of the Jews. That type of mindset leads to dangerous implications. Even an atheist like Richard Dawkins says that if we're to take our moral compass from a Darwinism framework, it could lead to fascism. Now, all of these things are interesting to me because, like I said, I've given you 3 different perspectives, one from a mass murderer, one from a dictator, and one from an atheist, and they're all saying the same thing. It leads to life being untenable. It doesn't lead to somewhere practical if taken to its logical conclusion. So I think that was a very interesting thing to consider about how morality breaks down if there is no objective point of reference, God. But if anything, I can always play a YouTube video. Now I know I have some in background.
Yeah, I think that would be good. But you've really had a very good point. I was watching a documentary called Human Zoos in the summer when I was doing a course by the Discovery Institute. I never knew that, you know, actually the scientific community, they were actually using evolution to look at the pygmies in Africa as though they were subhuman, and they actually had caged a few of those tribes when they carried them over to the US. And it was really horrifying to see. Thank God we're not really at that stage in mainstream science now. But as you mentioned, it's definitely, when you take that philosophy to its logical conclusion, these are the sorts of, you know, injustices that will result. So yeah, if you have a little video preset. So this is what we're looking forward to discuss further when Mr. Malone comes back on our meeting today. For anyone who just joined us, that's where we're having a bit of a technical difficulty, but we just wanted to begin the presentation by just doing a little discussion. So thank you.
Okay, so here's a little series of discussions. I just think that way, but series of discussions where William A. Craig actually epic responses to AP's objections against a belief in God. All right. You guys can hear? I need to share.
No, I don't think you shared some.
Exceedingly briefing. Nature exists.
Yes, I'm hearing now.
If there's an argument against that, I haven't
right.
heard it. To argue that naturalism therefore is correct simply requires the additional view that none of the positive arguments for supernaturalism work. To declare that supernaturalism cannot be proven false is in itself not a positive argument for supernaturalism. I've
now,
made that
Dr.
point
Shook,
repeatedly.
from those two premises that nature exists and that there is no bridge to a supernatural reality, do you really think that it follows that nature is all there is?
That is the most reasonable conclusion remaining
by what
so far.
logical rule of inference does that follow? It seems to me that from those two premises, all that follows is we don't know if there is something beyond nature.
Let me try an analogy. Suppose, to see how my reasoning process works, let me try an analogy. Suppose you have a large sum of money you wish to invest, and I'm a broker, and I'm telling you the stock market's going up and up and up and up and up. And you say to me, well, now look, I'm pretty happy with my bank checking account. My money's really safe. Give me several positive good reasons for investing it in the stock market. And I proceed to give you one after another really weak in your judgment argument. And after you get past the third or fourth one, you stop me and you say, no, I'm not going to additionally try to put my money in the stock market. I don't want my money there. You haven't given me enough good reasons.
Okay, now,
the naturalist is somebody who retains
this
belief in
exactly
nature.
Illustrates my point. That person has not given you reasons to believe the stock market is going up. But that doesn't allow you anyway logically to conclude that therefore the stock market isn't going to go up or that it's going to go down. You simply have to withhold judgment. You see, it seems to me your reasoning here is logically invalid.
No, it's not logically invalid. It's simply conservative. I'm very conservative with my money.
Well, let's talk.
Let me again try to explain very briefly without taking up your valuable time. Look, suppose your stockbroker said, well, why are you so hesitant to invest money in the stock market? After all, you can't prove that the stock market won't go up. Should you say, well, come a day, I'm getting rich. I can't prove the stock market isn't going up. I'm going to get rich.
Come on, now, look, Dr. Shook.
That's unwise
Dr.
reasoning,
Shook,
I
please,
think.
let's be serious. The point is, the point is,
I assure you, I'm serious about
from
money.
the lack of evidence that the market will go up, it does not follow that therefore the market will not go up.
I just
but it
agreed
doesn't
to that,
follow
yes.
that it's going to go down.
I agree
and
with
yet
that point entirely.
naturalism is the view that there is nothing beyond the physical world on your definition, and you admit you cannot prove that by reason, science, and experience.
You're manipulating words. A naturalist is convinced that nature exists. Okay?
So am I.
You're asking the naturalist to additionally believe in the existence of the supernatural, and the naturalist is simply saying, give me some good enough positive arguments.
That's not
Now,
the
we've
definition
gone
of
back and forth
naturalism you
on the-
give. Your
sorry?
definition of naturalism is that there's nothing beyond the physical world, that there's nothing in addition to matter and energy. There are no supernatural realities. And the absence of evidence for those leaves you at best with agnosticism, not with naturalism. Naturalism cannot establish its own
it's-
worldview.
Quite right. It's unfortunate that we're back to debating terminology instead of reality. This business of agnosticism is a bit odd. Suppose I were to say the reason why I don't believe in the supernatural is because, I have not enough good reasons to believe in it. Now, does this make me an agnostic or an atheist? In a weird sort of way, I'm both. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive terms. An agnostic is somebody who cannot prove that supernaturalism is false, but again, that in and of itself is not a positive reason to go ahead and jump into the
But has
chasm and
anybody
think you're gonna
offered
land
in
on
tonight's
something.
debate the claim that because you can't show supernaturalism to be false, therefore you should believe in supernaturalism? Who has argued that tonight?
Well,
Nobody. I've given five
When I
positive
hear
arguments
you-
for
you have
supernaturalism,
tonight,
and we've not heard any positive arguments for naturalism. All you have said is that my arguments fail, but that doesn't serve to establish that the material world is the only reality there is. There could be something beyond it.
there could be something beyond it, and I've already
All
told
right.
you it might be more nature. For all you know or anybody
That's
knows,
self-contradictory.
I don't need the
If it's
supernatural.
more nature, it's not beyond it, right? That's a self-contradiction, friends. Those who say that there may be more nature beyond it, it's still nature. That doesn't say there is something beyond nature.
Hi. There's a lot of talk about the burden of proof, and I just wanted to point out firstly that you cannot prove the non-existence of a thing. And naturalists accept this. But the problem is when you invoke God as an explanation for that, what you're doing is you're invoking something that is inherently inexplicable. Thereby, you're not solving the problem, you're not explaining anything, you're confounding the problem. You have more to explain. And I just want to ask you, do you think that invoking God as a hypothesis about natural things or the origin of life or the origin of the universe, I think that's an advancement to knowledge?
Now, repeat the first part of the question again, because I disagreed with what you said there.
It is impossible to
Oh,
prove
yeah, that's right.
the
It's impossible to prove something does not exist. That's silly. Of course you can prove something does not exist. We can prove, for example, that there are no living Tyrannosaurus Rex on the face of the earth. We can prove that there are no Muslims of the United States Senate. Or, as Dr. Shook says, if you can show that something is a self-contradiction, he's in the House. Yeah. You can show that something is self-contradictory. So there are no married bachelors. So this is an atheist line that you hear on the popular level all the time, but that sophisticated atheists don't take, because it is easy to prove that things don't exist. Now the question is, if it is the case that you can't prove that God does not exist, then you shouldn't be a naturalist. You should be some sort of agnostic or something, but you shouldn't go around saying things like, nature is all there is. There is nothing beyond matter and energy. There is no supernatural reality. Because those claims exceed what you yourself say you can prove. So you need to make more modest claims about your position that are more simply agnostic or something, and find a new name rather than naturalism, because that isn't something that you can sustain the burden of proof for. Now, the last part of your question assumed that I was presenting God as some sort of an explanatory hypothesis. And if you look at my arguments, they're not like that. These are deductive arguments. Now, what that means is that if the premises are true, that the conclusion follows logically and necessarily. Whether you like it or not, whether you think it's explanatory or not, it doesn't matter. All that matters is, are the premises more plausibly true than not? Because if they are, then the conclusion is logically unavoidable. And so, yes, I think they definitely represent an increase in knowledge. This is an example of deductive logical reasoning. And it can't be impugned by saying that it's not some sort of explanatory inference to the best explanation or something of that sort.
Sorry. Are we ready now? Dr. Malone, are you ready now to present?
Okay, hello? Marcel, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm gonna make you co-host.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, hang on a second. Okay.
Worst case scenario, I'll take
I can't
control
hear
of this.
anything from you on your end.
You're not hearing me?
Okay. If you can hear me, hold your thumb up. Can you hear me? So you can hear me. I cannot hear you at all. There's no sound.
All right, can you hear me now?
Okay, wow. If you can hear me, let me tell you what's happened. Since I tested my system with Sarah 2 hours ago, I left my computer on. Someone must have downloaded a virus because nothing works on my computer. I can't access my files. I can't run my PowerPoint. I can't even get back into the Zoom meeting on my computer. So I have no presentation to share at this moment. We could just talk, but I can't even hear you. And I am on a different computer.
Okay, Mr. Malone, if you want, you could send me your PowerPoint. I could send it to Marcel and he could share while or you can't access the file right now. That's what you're saying.
Wait, he can hear you, sir. Sir, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Marcel.
Wow, no audio. So the two computers we have in
Check
our
your audio
house,
settings.
neither one
Is it up to
responding.
100? Let me type it in the chat.
Okay. All right, I just found the control panel and turned the sound up. Try, Marcel, say something.
All right.
Okay, I can
you
hear
hear me
you
now?
I can hear you now.
Awesome.
So this is over the top, incredibly frustrating. My computer, apparently somebody has downloaded, uploaded a virus to it, and nothing works. All the controls, all the commands, none of them work.
Can you send me the presentation and I could share screen and you could probably get I could just change the presentation for you.
Or you're not able to access the slides?
I'm not even, it's all on my computer. Everything is, I actually worked on an older presentation last night, got it all ready, made many changes, added in the videos so it was all ready to go. And I even made more changes this morning. And all of that is on my computer. I don't have a backup copy. I could, but I could go, I could go to a hard drive where I have backups and I could find an older version, but it's going to take me a good 10 minutes to do that and then send it to you on this computer.
Okay, Mr. Malone, I've heard you speak and I know you speak well. So even without the PowerPoint, I would love us to have a discussion, but I don't know if Marcel prefers.
I think graphics would work best than just speaking. I don't know if they would just give us a little bit more time. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I don't know what is happening.
Yeah, someone has sent a virus to my computer and it is not working at all.
But like I said, see if you can try and send us the presentation.
All right, let me work on that.
It.
I've got to find out my backup external hard drive, hook it up to this computer, load it on this computer, and then send it to you. I'll do it as quick as I can.
Okay, if not the last resort, I really wouldn't want the persons to come here without hearing anything. So yeah, if not within 10 minutes, then we can just commence with the talk. I really appreciate your time. And these things happen, we all know, with technology. COVID taught us very well.
Well, this is the first time somebody has hacked into my computer and totally taken it over. I've never had this
Oh,
happen.
gosh, I'm sorry. I really hope it works better. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff on there I would hate to lose. So I don't know what I'm gonna do. But let me get working.
Well, Marcel, I don't know if you want to share a screen or I should share a screen. What if you have another video? We do have a lot of things that we could do in the meantime.
I
So that
could continue with
yes. All right.
the video from last week as well.
All right.
I was speaking in one of the West Coast universities, and while I was speaking there, I'd been invited to speak on a philosophical theme, and I arrived there, and this fellow who picked me up was really quite intimidating, and he took me to a health food restaurant before I began to speak. I've got nothing against health food restaurants. It's just that I've never seen too many healthy people in health food restaurants. You just go in there and you wonder what's going to come after the sunflower seeds are over, maybe more seaweed or something like that. And it was about 82 degrees, and there was a fellow sitting in the restaurant with a black cape, a black woolen cape that started at the top of his neck and went down to his knees. And where the cape ended, his leather boots began. And I said, oh my, where have I come? And I'm cynical enough to look in his direction and mutter to myself, I wonder whether he's a student or a subject. You know, it just looks so strange. I don't know what kind of a place I'm going into. Till finally, the fellow across the table looked at me and said, I hear, Mr. Zacharias, that you do not believe in evolution. I said, do you mean atheistic evolution? He said, yes. I said, no, I don't believe in it. He said, you don't? I said, no, sir. I said, if you're telling me that matter has caused mind, I don't believe it. He said, you don't? I said, no. He said, I can't believe that a professor would find it hard to give into such evidence. And I said, do you believe in evolution? And he said, absolutely. I said, atheistic evolution? He said, yes. I said, I can't believe that an intelligent fellow will. I said, tell me something. Do you believe time plus matter plus chance has produced your brain? You know, and he paused for a moment. I said, you know, time, long range of time. And I said, matter, you know, bouncing up and down, blub, 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 over aeons of lots of matter bouncing over lots of time. And chance, I said, I really don't know what chance means to you. I said, I've read books on the philosophy of chance. I said, but frankly, I've come to the conclusion that chance is just a catchword to explain what you don't understand. I said, if I were to ask you to show me chance, we can't stand at the window together and you say, there goes chance. See, chance doesn't have a body. I said, if you take a coin to toss it into the air, 9 times in a row it comes down heads, the possibility of it coming tails the 10th time is 50-50. I said, chance doesn't have a body, doesn't have power. I said, frankly, I believe chance is nothing. Chance is no thing. I said, and just in case you don't know what nothing means, Aristotle defined nothing as that which rocks dream about. That's a pretty good definition of nothing. Unfortunately, he had to bring rocks into it, but it's a pretty good definition of nothing. You can't conceive of it in your mind. I said, but I'll give it to you. Time plus matter plus chance has created your brain. He said, yeah, I have to say that. I said, if time plus matter plus chance has created your brain, then truth as an absolute category no longer exists. Because truth by nature is absolute. Time is changing, matter is changing, chance, whatever it is changing. You never get time, matter, and chance remaining the same. If time plus matter plus chance...
Okay. Marcel?
Yes, Dr. Malone.
Okay, technology has conquered.
It has a way, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, so
the sound set up. Okay, turns out when I got my new computer several months ago, I signed up for the Microsoft Cloud. So it saved all of my changes in the Neverland somewhere up there in the cloud. And when I pulled it up on the new computer, I have the correct presentation. So I'm ready to roll.
Awesome. Take it away, sir.
Okay, wait, give me 30 seconds. I have several demonstrations. I am now in a different room, which is not as nice. I need to bring my props up here, so I've got them at my fingertips. I will be back in 30 seconds and we'll start.
Okay. All right, again, we apologize for the delay. Technologies, something else. Maybe we started a pre-presentation 3 hours before, but something still happened. You know.
Okay.
But
Is everybody, you can hear me, correct?
yes, we can hear you clearly.
Okay, I'm gonna start even while I'm heading downstairs where everything is set up. And I did want to start just by saying, you know, I have used and studied science my entire life. So even though I'm not a biologist, I'm a physicist, a cosmologist, a geologist. I've studied all of these areas of science for many years. And I know very well what science could do and what science cannot do. That's what has enabled me to invent 18 unique products for my company before I left to work full time and teach and speak on creation. The other thing, I think we need to define our terms very early. And I will start with the first slide. One moment. Switching. As we start to talk about one of, I think, the most important topics which people can talk about, and that is, where did we come from? We must realize there's only two possible explanations for explaining. Where did all the time, space, matter, energy of the universe come from? Where did stars come from? Where did life itself come from? Where did human beings come from? The two possibilities are that everything made itself, or that the physical universe that we can use science to test and understand and see how it operates is not part of the one who made the physical universe and everything in it. And that there is a creator outside of time, space, matter, and energy, which made all of these things, including life. So science is a tool to understand how does creation operate. But by using this tool, we can discover that certain things are possible and certain things are absolutely impossible and could never happen. Now, one more thing as we get started. The originators of modern science, which really started back in the 15 and 1600s, were all almost exclusively, there may have been some few minor exceptions, but they were all Bible-believing Christians. They believed that there was a creator. They believed that this creation was recently created, not millions and billions of years ago, but literally thousands of years ago. And these are the men that developed modern science. We're talking of Isaac Newton, the greatest physicist that ever lived. We're talking Michael Faraday, that invented electromagnetic induction and electric motors and the use of electricity itself for electroplating and other things. Lord Kelvin, who invented the temperature scale. Louis Pasteur, that invented pasteurization and proved that life only comes from pre-existing life. Chemicals never come alive. James Maxwell, that laid out all of the magnetics that explain the electromagnetic spectrum of modern electronics. Everything that we work with electricity and technology came from his knowledge and understanding. All of these scientists believe we can study creation because it's been made by a logical creator. Therefore, we should be able to understand how it operates. And acknowledging that kept none of them, all of them believed in a recent creation, kept none of them from developing modern science. So evolution is a very recent development in science. It assumes, now this is very, very important, it assumes natural processes made everything. Life made itself. There has never been a major step change in creation, such as a worldwide flood. That huge periods of time are what created the universe and matter and energy, and life slowly transformed one step into another. Now, the word evolution is used in two very, very different ways. In one way, it simply means change, which is absolutely true. Things change. In biology, almost every example that you will read and hear about in textbooks that uses the word evolution, it uses a meaning that when any organism has an offspring, there are changes in that offspring, and those changes may be detrimental and they may be useful. And if they're useful, the animal will advance, make more copies like itself, and advance upward. Now, the idea that organisms have variation that may be useful and may be detrimental, and if they're that's absolutely true. If that's all evolution meant, it would be absolutely true. But evolution has never shown that a random mutational mistake or change in the DNA code could add information to the DNA. It's always a change which either eliminates information or it's some parallel change that adds no more complexity to the organism. And in some small way, it may be useful in a specific environment. So when evolution is used to mean a bacteria could turn into a human being, there are enormous problems with that you will never hear or see about in the textbooks and the science museums. It's just assumed we'll eventually figure it out. Evolution's a fact. Now, let me explain something a little more clearly, because I love demonstrations. I like to think of this box in a thought experiment as the entire universe. So just do this with me. This box is all of the stars, all of the galaxy, all of the energy, everything that's alive. This happens to be a jewelry box. It's filled with jewelries, beautiful, colorful things made by intelligence and creativity. Well, that might be like the life on Earth, enormous varieties, complexity, and beauty. But where did the box come from and everything in the box? Again, well, there's really only two possibilities. Either the box made itself, starting with nothing, because if the Big Bang or evolution starts with something, you have to explain where did that something come from. So those in the graduate programs and upper levels of cosmology, they understand that the Big Bang is inherently saying everything started with nothing. And even when Stephen Hawking and others say, well, maybe gravity is what brought it all together, they're still saying, well, what made gravity and how could gravity exist, but there's nothing there for it to even operate on. It's a belief system with no proof to support it. Or the other option is this box, everything in this box exists because something outside the box itself made it. Now that is the foundational belief of Christianity, and both of these are beliefs. We've never seen complex information added to the DNA code, simply random modifications of information, which in one way or another are essentially deteriorating it, that might have a useful purpose. And that's assumed to be allow one animal to slowly modify itself and turn into another. But we've also never seen the creation of a new form of life just suddenly appearing. So both of them are beliefs. Now I want to start this whole discussion as we're talking about the incredible complexity of life that gives us this rock solid assurance and understanding that we have a creator from science, from observation. But I want to start by looking at what those who eliminate that from their thinking. They try to explain everything without even having that in their minds. How do they explain everything? And I'm going to start with a little video, and it's from the internet, and it's from a PhD astrophysicist. But listen to what she has to say.
I'm Jana, and I'm a professor of physics and astronomy. I work on where it all started. The simplest picture of the Big Bang starts with nothing. There's really nothing. There's no space, there's no time, there's no matter, there's no energy. It's nothing, but the potential to exist. And out of that bursts the universe. Time starts, space is created, all of the matter and the energy in the universe is born at that moment. In the first minute fraction of a second, the universe inflates. And then about 3 minutes later, atoms begin to form. And about 5 billion years later, galaxies begin to form. One of these galaxies, about 10 million years later, a little ordinary planet forms. And 14 billion years later, people evolve. We also know that the math that we're doing on pen and paper isn't going to be the whole story. It's possible that the universe was really a bounce from a previous history when the universe was already big. Or it's possible that our universe is just one kind of bubble or plume off of a patchwork of other bubbles and plumes. And so there's other universes out there. It's like a megaverse, but it might not be that way. But we know something happened, something that created a hot space from which the universe expanded and evolved.
Now you'll hear things like there was a fluctuation in the plasma of the quantum time-space continuum. Well, those are just words. They're all saying that nothing turned into everything. Now, there's a law of science called the first law of thermodynamics. It's basically the most tested observation of all humanity and all science. Every experiment ever done confirms it, or it wouldn't be a law of science that says matter and energy can never be created and never be destroyed. No scientist has ever, with all of our particle accelerators, all of our experiments, all of our tests, all of our knowledge, even made a single atom ever appear or disappear. You can make energy into matter, matter into energy, but get the same equivalent amount that you started with. So we know the answer. If the options are the box made itself, or the box has something made everything in the box, we know by scientific observation, the box couldn't have made itself. So there's nothing non-scientific, nothing illogical. And as a matter of fact, it is the most logical conclusion that nothing becomes nothing. So creation is actually on a very firm scientific foundation. Now, the main part of this lecture I want to talk about is the absolute astounding complexity of a living cell. The simplest cell is more complex than the most complicated machine mankind has ever produced. I mean, if nothing else, you could set this little biological machine on a counter, and the next day there's multiple copies that are essentially, with minor changes called mutations, identical to the original. Machines can't do that. They can't reproduce perfect copies of themselves in and of themselves. Yet that's what life does. It has thousands of parts, and none of these parts occur naturally. Now, here's what I mean. The most common part inside of any living organism, whether it's a bacteria or a banana tree or a whale or a human being, a skin cell, one little part of us, is a chemical called a protein. Now, there's also enzymes, there's DNA, there's lots of other, but by far the most common chemical in any living cell or bacteria, which is a single-celled organism that's alive and can make copies, are proteins. Now, these proteins are exactly analogous to the parts of a machine. They have to be shaped exactly right. They have to be placed exactly right. They have to interact with the other parts of the living cell machine in exactly the right way because of their shape and their function and their placement. Just like the parts of a watch, or the pieces of the internal part of a computer, or the parts of an automobile, they're designed by intelligence to a certain specification and shape to fit into exactly the right spot and interact with the other parts. Perfect analogy. The parts of a machine, to take a pen, for example, a pen has a tube and an ink cartridge and a spring and a button so it'll click and a clip to go in your pocket, 6, 7, 8 parts. Every one of them is designed by intelligence to the perfect shape so the entire structure will function and work in its intended function. Exactly the same thing with the parts of these machines, of a cell. Now, here's what a protein looks like. I'm going to back up. Okay, let me go back to showing you a protein. The proteins which God designed. There's a can here, and I have a model of what one looks like. I don't know if you can see this, I'm gonna hold it a little closer, but it's a long chain of beads, and each of the beads are different colors. Now, the proteins of life are made from 20 different beads. Scientists call these little tiny physical objects amino acids. And there's 20 different kinds, and they're made from a specific arrangement of atoms that allow them to have a certain shape. Now, I'm just gonna lift a few more of these out of the can. What happens with these beads is that they naturally link up, these amino acids. So the 20 colors will link up in a certain order. And because of the order at which the 20 different individual shapes link up, the entire protein will then bend and twist and fold to form a very specific shape. That shape is called a specific protein, which is needed inside of a cell. Now, a bacteria, the simplest form of life that can reproduce itself, has about 1,000 or more specifically designed proteins or parts. Now, let me show you what one of these parts looks like. And I'm gonna tip this down just a little bit. I'm gonna let this protein out. Okay, it's gonna come out of this can. I don't know if you can see it, but it's rolling out of the can, coming out in a long string. Now, when I do this live in front of an audience, I'll actually run back and forth across the stage. I'm gonna bring it a little closer.
Oh, I did that rub
Okay, this is one protein. It is about 3,000 amino acids long. If I was to string it into it, I could run across the 20-foot stage 6 times, back and forth and back and forth. Every single color, and there's 20 different colors, has to be in exactly the right spot. This entire molecule, because every little color is in the right spot, it will bend, twist, and fold into a perfect 3-dimensional geometrical shape to form a part inside of the living cell machine. Now, there are 1,000 different ones in any bacteria. There are 100,000 of these proteins in the human body, and every one of them is different, and none of them occur naturally. When you hear things in textbooks or museums about scientists, have come very close to making life in a laboratory, they always cheat. They start with proteins and parts that only are formed inside of living cells. If they just mix the amino acids, the 20 different colored beads together, they'll link up into chains, but they'll never form the right structure or shape. I want to show you one more thing. Okay, I'm going to jump ahead. What you'll hear in textbooks is from an experiment from 1952 called the Miller-Urey experiment. What they did in 1952, okay, now we're talking 70 years ago, okay? 70 years ago, this experiment was done. It is still in textbooks today. Now, I'm going to get to the significance of that in a second. Urey took methane, ammonia, hydrogen, and water, those are all gases, put them in a cylinder, and then added like a spark, like a lightning strike. And that added energy to cause a reaction that formed some of these amino acids. And in all the textbooks, the children are taught to think in this way. Wow, they did an experiment in 1952 where they formed some of the beads that are needed to make proteins. And this, 1 billion years ago on Earth, is how life formed on Earth. And they're left with that implication. We know how the little beads formed, therefore we know how life formed. This is what students aren't told. Miller left oxygen out, and yet as far as we go down into the rock layers of the Earth, there is always oxidized rocks. All the evidence says oxygen has always been here on Earth, but he left oxygen out because you don't get amino acids if oxygen is present. He got a useless blend of amino acids. They were right-handed and left-handed, identical in every way, like a right-handed, left-handed glove, but you could never get your left hand into the right-hand glove correctly. And life only uses the left-handed version. So it was a useless blend of these amino acids. It would never work for life. He only got, in all the experiments in the last 70 years that try to reproduce this, they only get somewhere in the range of 6 to 8 of the required amino acids for life. Nobody has ever shown where the other 10 to 12 come from. There were other chemicals that were produced in greater quantities that would have stopped proteins from forming. And again, I'll do a demonstration. We're all familiar with Lego blocks. Think of these like proteins like the Lego blocks of life. You know, you got to take the little Lego blocks, you got to get the right blocks, you got to put them in the right position, you got to have the right number of them to make whatever structure the instructions tell you to make. So let's say we're trying to make a chain of amino acids that causes the entire protein to bend and fold the right way. And by random, you might have a red one, and then you might have add a yellow one to the top. Then there might be a blue one, and then another yellow one, and then you might have a green one. But guess what? When this experiment is all done, you always get chemicals that cap the chain. See, that one's round and you can't add any more Legos to the top of it. So it stops the formation of the chain. You get far more of this kind of chemical than you do these kind of chemicals. So you could never form proteins in this way. And lastly, hemoglobin in our blood is a protein. Now it's only about 400 beads long instead of 3,000. Some of them, by the way, are 50,000 long. But if there's even one of the colors in the wrong spot, like a green one is just randomly, accidentally misplaced with a red one, and all 398 somehow by random chance ended up in the right spot, that's a disease called sickle cell anemia. It's a mutational mistake when the proteins are being made for hemoglobin. And 100 years ago, people lived an average of 2 years old when they had sickle cell anemia. Now, they with blood transfusions, medicine, all sorts of protection, and trying to keep them from bruising and all sorts of breathing problems because the blood doesn't carry oxygen right, people will live an average of 40 years with somewhat of a miserable life because of one misplaced amino acid on one of 100,000 proteins in their body. And we're supposed to believe that science has proven that all of these proteins just made themselves perfectly in order to form even the first form of life. You can show statistically that it's more impossible than anything imaginable in the entire universe that even one of these proteins could make itself by random chance. So God makes it obvious what the truth is. Now, I just want to show one more thing. I don't. If you can see the cursor on my screen, this little thing. Well, let me back up. I'm going to back up. If you look at this picture of this little bacteria, it has this thing called a flagellum hanging out the back. Also, they're known as cilia. They often have a little electric motor, exactly like an electric motor, which would be produced by a human being, same parts, same repulsion of positive and negative charges, causing a shaft to spin inside of a sealed ring and so on. Except this little electric motor inside of a bacteria has 40 parts, and each of these parts is a protein. So the amino acids line up just perfectly to make this shape, which is kind of a seal on the shaft. Another protein lines up to make that shape. Another protein lines up to make this shape, which also generates negative charges. This unit here on the inside repels those negative charges with positive charges that turn on and off. There's sealing rings. There's a flagellum, which has different proteins in here that cause it to hook. 40 different precisely designed parts, positions precisely to make an electric motor. And if any of them were missing, it wouldn't work. It would be a detrimental, useless piece of junk inside of the bacteria. And you can put 10,000 of these motors in the width of a human hair. Humanity hasn't begun to make anything this complex. And we pretend, because we choose to just leave God out of the equation, that it all made itself. And I think anybody with an open mind will look at something like this and realize, I'll just be stunned at the intelligence and the creativity and the genius of the creator who made such a thing on such a scale. Now, I probably only have time for one more subject. Oh, by the way, I'm going to share this little video. This was a bacteria found in the lowest rock layers of the earth where they found life. This would have been the earliest rock layers laid down after the worldwide flood in a historical context. It has 7 purple gears, perfectly formed, surrounded by 21 green gears, also perfectly sized, shaped, placed, and formed. And at the base of each of those purple gears is one of those little electric motors. So there's 7 electric motors spinning those gears, and the green gears make sure that all of the little fibrous hairs are spinning in the same direction at the same speed. So this bacteria can swim around, sense food, and head in the right direction and find it, forming a little propeller. That's just astounding. The earliest form of life with that kind of complexity. Now, that's what the evolutionists would say. It all just happened by chance over time, and yet where's the time? That's the earliest form of life. And it's just suddenly there. There's no slow step change as the motor adds a piece at a time and the gears add a piece at a time. It's just there. It is literally supernaturally created. Now, last subject. I want to talk about DNA. And you really can't appreciate what DNA is until you appreciate these proteins. DNA is a computer programmed language that allows raw materials to be gathered to build these proteins that are shaped to form the parts of the living cell. And every part of a cell is talking to every other part, telling it, I need more of this chemical, I need more of that chemical, I need more materials, you need more stuff in through the membranes, you need to get rid of stuff in the membranes, all just constantly communicating in a big computer network inside of the cell. And the DNA is providing the information to produce these proteins to form the parts. Now, it is literally like a book. And we've discovered that in the last, 40 years, and that's since the 1950s when we discovered the structure of the DNA. And only in the last 10 to 15 years, we've completely decoded the DNA of human beings. And you can literally, it's made from 4 letters. I mean, the computer language is only 2 letters. It's a 1 or a 0. And they're assigned meaning, and they allow all the capturing of information of any other language. English language is 26 letters. Smoke signals are just smoke of certain shapes and so on. So a language is anything that is assigned meaning by intelligence to perform a function or transfer knowledge. And that's exactly what DNA does. It is a language, except it's a language like nothing mankind has ever imagined or been able to accomplish. For one thing, those 4 chemicals, as they line up down along that spiral structure of DNA, they can be read forwards and backwards to create 2 different proteins. If you're just kind of reading along and lining up the 20 different possible amino acids to form a protein in the forward direction, you will get 1 protein. But if you take that same section of DNA and now you start to line up the amino acids backwards, you'll get a completely different shaped protein. It's like reading a book forwards or a word forwards and having one meaning, and reading that same set of letters backwards, you'll get a different meaning. And that's what DNA does. Here's an example. Okay. There's a word, star, and we all know exactly what it means. Can you read it backwards and tell me what it means? And I think you probably all already know that. Backwards, it means rats. Totally different meaning, same set of letters, forward versus backwards. I'll give you another example. Deliver. We get packages and they are delivered to us. We know what that means. But how about backwards? I'm going to give you a second to think about it. You start at the R and go backwards. Some of you may have already gotten it. It spells the word revile, which means hated. Totally different meaning, forward and backwards. God means one thing forwards, G-O-D, Backwards, it's D-O-G, doll, totally different meaning, and so on. But DNA doesn't just do it with a word. There are literally tens of thousands of sequential sections of DNA that can be read forward and backwards. It's literally like reading a book, word after word, sentence after sentence, paragraph after paragraph, chapter after chapter forwards, and getting one meaning. It's a great mystery novel. And then starting at the back and reading this same book backwards, word after word, sentence after sentence, paragraph after paragraph, page after page, and all of a sudden it's a technical book on how to take apart an automobile, and it all makes sense. No human being could do that, but that's what God has done with the DNA molecule. Now here's the even bigger problem. Well, it just all evolved. There were random rearrangements of letters, and then they started to have a useful function. Well, if you were randomly rearranging the letters that were useful in the forward direction, you would be totally destroying the meaning at the same time in the backwards direction. So it couldn't work. You wouldn't have DNA that would work in both directions if it was randomly being changed, because you'd be destroying the information while you were creating it. I'm going to jump past this, and I'm going to look at, but we haven't even scratched the surface of how compacted the useful functioning information that God wrote into DNA is. DNA has overlapping information in addition to forward and backwards meaning. Now here's a chapter. I like chocolater that evening. Well, what in the world is that? That doesn't even make sense. Now, these are a series of letters lined up in sequence to convey meaning. If you read that in a book, you'd assume, well, that's just a mistake. But here's what happens when that sort of sequence happens on DNA. The first part of that sequence of letters makes a statement, and it has a functional, useful, totally correct meaning. I like chocolate. It's in yellow and underlined. Now, the last half of that sequence says later that evening. So the whole thing put together says, I like chocolate later that evening, but it's been compressed into a shorter series of letters. 4 of the letters overlap to be used in both parts of the sentence. It's a compression of information to convey more information in a shorter number of letters. But something has to tell the DNA. It's called the epigenome. There's a huge area of genetics and biological sciences because they're discovering all this extra information in DNA, and something turns on the DNA and turns it off to select just the right letters in order to create just the right protein. And it's all been compacted. Unbelievably complex. Third, there's spliced in information. Again, we'll look at that same sentence. Here's that sentence, I like chocolater late that evening, could have produced 2 different proteins from that information. But this time I've highlighted just certain letters. Here, I'll repeat it where I've underlined them. Now, I'll let you look at it for a second. Anybody kind of guess what is the message there just from the underlined letters? And now I'll show it to you. You just select those letters. It says, I like her hat. And that's exactly what the mechanisms inside a cell can do with the information on DNA. Something tells them to just select inside information embedded inside of that string of information to create yet another protein molecule that's needed. How much and at what time, it's all being sent back and forth, this enormous computer programming system inside of a single simple living cell, far from simple. And then there's embedded information, stuff that is still not just spliced in, but it's embedded inside. There is encrypted information where the letters actually are used to mean different letters, so the different amino acids are selected than you would think would be selected. And then the way the DNA even folds in a 3-dimensional structure allows different letters to be selected where the overlaps happen. Now, think, oh my goodness. I mean, our mouths should be dropping open in absolute awe at the genius of a programmer who could create such a language. And the amount of information is just mind-boggling. And let me try to put it in perspective, and then we'll wrap up with some questions. Think of one of the smallest particles of sand that you can imagine. And Jamaica is just, surrounded by beaches, just a ground up, teeniest little speck of sand. And I have a bowl here that I just grabbed some sugar particles. That little speck of information is 100,000 times larger than all the DNA in a single cell. So 100,000 cells would fill that single speck of sugar. If you took all of the DNA from the cells in our body, and that's what this teaspoon of sugar would represent, just the DNA, and we have 100 trillion cells in the human body. So you pull out all the library books, all the information content of those cells, it'd be about the size of a teaspoon of sugar. Now, that's maybe, if you kind of compacted it, you're talking about a pretty small little flash drive, okay? That's about the size of the information containing system of the human body. How many books of information could it contain? Well, here's the analogy. Okay, I gotta do this. I'm gonna have to back up to do this. If you were to stack books all the way from the surface of the earth, really thick technical books with size 9 font, all the way from here to the moon, okay? And by the way, whenever you look in illustrations in textbooks of the earth and the moon, kind of looks like that. This is actually a blue small ball. It's about 5 centimeters in diameter. And the moon is about a little less than 2 centimeters in diameter. It's a fourth the diameter of the earth. You kind of see the earth floating here and the moon's out about here. Well, it turns out the earth's diameter is about 25,000 miles and the moon's 250,000 miles away. So it's 10 times the circumference of the earth. That's how far away the moon is. So the moon is actually, I can't even stretch it far enough. The moon is actually, this is the earth. The moon is actually way out here. Now just think with me, pure information always has an intelligent source found inside of DNA, useful functioning purpose, coded informational language written on chemicals, books stacked all the way from the surface of the earth to the moon, 500 times. That's how much information God has packed in to a little flash drive about the size of a teaspoon of sand inside of our bodies. Unbelievable. But what is truly unbelievable is that human beings would prefer to believe it all made itself instead of acknowledging the obvious, that we have an intelligent creator. And that's where I want to end. This is such a key Bible verse. The Bible claims thousands of times to be the word of God. It predicts the future in advance and in absolutely astounding specific predictions. Every one of them has come clear that has already happened. You can test it out. So you know it's written by somebody outside of time and space and matter. And time is a part of the box. Time is part of the physical universe. So one of those ways we know the Bible is unique is it's clear, historically fulfilled in advance predictions in intricate detail that have happened. So it's been inspired and written by someone outside of time and space who sees all the future, all the current, all the past, all the present, all simultaneously, because time isn't trapped into it for him. He made this statement. He said that which may be known about God is clear because we can see it through creation, even God's very power and nature, so that every human being is without excuse for belief in him. And that's what he's done by putting his fingerprints upon the biological life of creation. And all of our attempts to explain it by evolutionary processes, they have enormous problems that don't even show up in the textbooks in museums and on the internet. because it's all managed by hundreds of years of people being trained to think they can explain these things without God. And it's the best they've been able to come up with. Final thought, and then we'll do questions. Miller's experiment, done in 1952, is in every biology textbook, every museum, every college biology textbook in the world for 70 years. And yet, what it actually shows is that life could not possibly have formed that way. You don't get the right amino acids, you don't get all the amino acids, you can't explain how they lined up in the right way, you get a useless blend of right and left hand ones, and you get no informational content that creates proteins of the right shape. What it shows is that life couldn't have formed in that way. And yet 70 years later, they've never found anything better, or it wouldn't still be being shown. And that's just an example of what's being left out as you only are hearing and seeing the evolutionary perspective. So now we'll open it up for questions. Anybody left? Boy, I hope you could all hear all that. I just talked for 40 minutes straight.
Thank you, Dr. Malone. So the floor is open to questions. Are there any questions? You can raise your hand or turn on your mic and speak. So you can ask any questions you may have. Any questions, any objections, concerns, you want to be clarified? Okay, so one person from the face-to-face audience is asking if you're willing to share the presentation or the slides that you're using today's talk with us.
Absolutely. Tell you what, when we're done, I'll send them to you, and you can make them, post them, make them available.
Okay, definitely. So all right, so I'll do it. To summarize, what are your four best arguments, just in summary, to show that DNA, the complexity of DNA, points to a create and disprove evolution? Four quick main points.
Four quick main points. Number one, every definition that fits what is a language fits the DNA code. It's a non-repeated sequence of symbols that serve a function and a purpose. They are not random, and they clearly have a functional to transfer information. So there has never been in all human endeavor an example of a language that developed by random processes. And this is a language. So that is an incredibly strong
is it fair for us to say that the language of DNA is something that about computer code, right?
Yeah, it's also called the code. A computer code is the same thing. By the way, any computer programmer, there is no computer programmer in any university that believes by randomly changing bits and bytes, they're going to improve their computer code. It will automatically end up being a better code.
And that was what I was wondering, because I remember seeing a quote, I think it was Bill Gates saying that DNA is like a computer code, but just way more complicated and way more complex.
Yeah.
And if it is that, if we expect as you degrade a code over time, it doesn't give us proper program, it makes the program crashes. We can't expect as you degrade over time, DNA to now function in such a way that it gets more and more complex. It's supposed to be losing information, not gaining information.
That's exactly right. And by the way, that is what we see with biological life. It is deteriorating downward. It is not advancing upward. More with every generation, there are more genetic diseases developing in the overall human family. In the Bible shows that there was enormous lifetimes early on with humanity. But because of our sin, because of our rejection and rebellion of God, and his desire that we would not continue to live indefinitely, eternally, physically separated from him, because we were now sinful and he wasn't, he allowed all creation, including biological life, to start deteriorating downwards. And the earliest sign of that is we see the early lifetimes of the early patriarchs of humanity living for multiple hundreds of years, and a steady decline, almost a logarithmic decrease. But okay, you asked for 4. We just went off on a rabbit trail. Okay.
Okay.
Number 3 is that the parts of any living cell are specifically shaped and designed to function and work as a whole and work together inside of the cell. And that could never happen just randomly. Number 3 is something called irreducible complexity. If you think of a mousetrap, the classic mousetrap has a platform. It has like a little hammer that's going to snap down and kill the mouse. It has a spring that allows it to spring forward, and you put a little bit of bait on top of a platform that when the mouse grabs the bait, it moves a catch, and then the hammer slaps down. It has 5 parts. If any one part is missing, it's a useless piece of junk. It does absolutely nothing. If this was part of a biological organism, it would be like expending lots of energy and lots of materials and resources to produce something that had absolutely no function. That animal would be at a disadvantage until everything was there. And we see tens of thousands of such examples of, unless every part is there, it's a useless piece of junk inside of an organism. That little electric motor is an example of that. Unless all 40 parts are there, they're the right shape, they're in the right position, none of it has any function, and it's a detriment to the organism. So you can't explain the interconnection of parts inside of life by evolutionary processes. You can't get there one little step at a time. It all has to be there or nothing works. And there are literally thousands of examples of this throughout nature. Probably if we had time, millions of examples of irreducible complexity where all the parts have to be there all at once. This screams design and designer, not random, slow evolutionary processes. And last, let's see, that was my favorite 3 when I deal with biological life. I guess last would be evolution demands that things are increasing in complexity and improving and turning into more complex things over time. We started with a bacteria, we ended up with a human being. That would be like starting with a little red wagon and ending up with the Starship Enterprise. Think of everything that would have to be added. That's the difference between a bacteria and a human being. And is that going to happen by going into a wagon factory, pulling the assembly manual for how to make a wagon, and then over time, marking out maybe 10 letters in the assembly manual for the wagon? Suppose there's 1,000 pages and you've just changed 10 letters out of, one letter on every 100 pages. Then you use the next book to make the next wagon. Well, you're probably still going to be able to make the wagon. You're still going to have most of the correct information. You'll still be able to read it. There's only one misspelled word every 100 pages. But after 10 books, there's a misspelled word every 10 pages. After 100 books, there's a misspelled word on every page. After 1,000 copies of the wagon, now there's 10 misspelled words or 10 misplaced words on every page. Is that going to turn that wagon into the Starship Enterprise? It's obvious, no way. It couldn't happen.
Right.
Natural selection, it's like the quality control department in the factory. It can look at the wagon. It can't see the assembly directions. Natural selection can't see the DNA code. It can't change it. It can't correct it. It can just see, does this animal function well in nature and in its environment? So maybe some word gets changed. Maybe blue gets changed to red, and now there's a red wagon. And maybe it has an advantage, but you haven't added complexity. What you are doing is slowly destroying and deteriorating the information content of the computer program or the language. And that's what we see in the biological world. And that's my evidence number 5. We don't see things upward advancing. We see things deteriorating. And occasionally that deterioration has a useful function, like a blind cave salamander is used as an example of evolution. If it lives in total darkness of a cave, it's blind, so it doesn't have to use its brain to try to interpret visual signals, and it might have an advantage. But it hasn't turned into a more advanced animal. It's deteriorating. It has less function, not more, and it's still a salamander. So the problem is the evolution doesn't work. The evidence shows it can't be true, and it directly contradicts what God has told us about where everything came from. So they're both faiths. Let's wrap it up right there. Evolution's a faith. Creation is a faith. Evolution pretends to be science. It's not. It's just a story to try to explain everything without God. Creation also uses science, but I think the vast majority of observations agrees with what God has told us and what it has to say about where everything came from.
Okay, so sorry to cut you, Dr. Malone. I think we have a quick question from Beverly. If
No
it
problem.
is said that we've been evolving over time, how is it that man has remained in the same form for so long? That's a question from Miss Beverly Williams. Do you
Okay.
need to read it again?
Okay, yes, read it one more time.
If it is said that we have been evolving over time, how is it that man has remained in the same form for so long?
Well, evolutionists would say we haven't. Evolutionists would say, you know, if God did not make people, and that was a supernatural event, and by definition, over the last 100 years, the textbooks, those involved in science, they have chosen to define science as only allowing the consideration of naturalistic processes. You got to leave God out and then try to figure out how everything happened. Well, that means you're not searching for the truth. You're just searching for an answer that leaves God out. So they look around and they say, where did this come from? Obviously, people didn't just suddenly appear on Earth. So where did people come from? And they've looked around over the last 150 years and they've said, well, apes are sort of like people. They have 2 arms, they have 2 legs, their hands, they have 10 fingers. They, you know, they can walk upright, at least for short periods of time. Since it's assumed people were not made by God, then the only possible option left is that some sort of an ape or something related to some sort of an ape, which is when extinct, turned into a person. And that some 4-legged person, thing, animal must have turned into the ape. And that some other sort of reptile type animal must have turned into a human. And some sort of fish must have turned into the amphibian. And it's all just, it's storytelling to try to explain it. So they would say people haven't always been people. People used to be apes. And over time, random changes as apes had babies and their brains were a little bigger, and as apes had babies and they had less hair, and as apes had babies and their thumbs started to not be used, designed to hang onto trees, but their thumbs became opposable so they could grip, you know, computer keyboards and steering wheels. They slowly turned into people. And whenever they find bones in the ground that are like variations of apes that are alive today, or they find bones in the ground that are variations of human beings that are alive today, they just line up those bones and they say, see, this proves apes have turned into humans, because there are lots of variations of apes and there are lots of variations of humans. And it's a whole nother lecture to talk about what are all those bones. And at some future time, we might want to do that. So I hope that helps to answer the question.
It did. I did. I think we've learned a lot today, and we look forward for the next week's presentation, hopefully with no technical difficulties. We'll try again at 1 o'clock just to see everything is okay. So we'll probably do 2 tests.
And I'll try to get my computer fixed between now and then. And just a little bit of a promotion. I'd like to do a promo. Whenever I'm speaking with students in public high schools, at universities, you know, and I'll give them all this evidence, which is, I believe, overwhelming evidence that we have a creator. I can see many of them thinking, and many of the questions I get are asking things like, well, how can intelligent people be so wrong? How can all of the textbooks be wrong? How can all the museums be wrong? How come only evolution is taught in our college classes and textbooks? If you're right, you're in the minority. How can the majority be wrong? And that's the question I'm going to address next week as I talk about blind to the obvious and give some more examples of how we can know for sure that God is our creator.
I just think it's just how science has been presented to us over the years growing up, because even when I found out recently that a few years ago that actually Christians, people believing in God, actually started science. Now, to me, that was shocking, because right now, science
Yeah.
is that
And it is
it's
true.
no dichotomy. You can't be both a scientist and believe in God. I mean, I remember seeing one of the Christian apologetics, his name is Dr. John Lennox, actually said that he was challenged and told him that he can't be a Christian and do math. To me, that is crazy. But
Yeah.
things like that is not going on in the world, that we're not being given a choice to choose between either being a Christian or be a scientist. And I don't see why you can't do both.
Well, there's no contradiction. And we'll end right there. There's absolutely no contradiction. The first command God gave to Adam and Eve after he created human beings, he said to take dominion over creation, over the birds of the air, the fish of the sea, the animals. He basically gave us stewardship over everything that he had made. But that ancient word, dominion, if you go back to the ancient Hebrew, it means literally to study, to understand, and to control. So God told us as human beings, study, understand, and control creation. Well, that is science. God told us to do science. And it's by doing science, we will know, not just hope, or not just think, or not just believe, we will literally intellectually know there has to be a creator.
I like that take. I think it's the first time actually I've heard that interpretation of go and dominate the earth, understand, study, and control. I really appreciate that one, sir, Dr. Malone. I think I'll be
You're
using
welcome.
it in future references.
Thank
That's a very
you,
catchy
everybody,
one.
for attending. Invite somebody else next week, and I look forward to being back.
So we look forward to seeing you next week, Dr. Malone. Thank you guys again for joining us for today's presentation. Look forward for our next 5 next week. And until then, we'll see you there. All right. Be
Okay,
safe. God bless.
I will send Sarah my slides, and I probably will have to send it by a different program than an attachment, because it's going to be very large.
Definitely, and we'll put it up on probably do a Google Drive and give everybody an access to see the presentation, along with my presentation that I did a couple weeks ago.
Very good.
But yes,
God
all
bless.
right. So all the best until next week.
Okay, bye-bye.